Welcome to Art Schools Network No More webinar series, where we cover vital topics, projects, and trends in support of excellence in art schools. Today is part 2 of a 3-part series with Americans for the Arts on Advocacy, 201, Making the Case. And we have as our guest presenter expert, Jeff Poulin. He's the Arts Education Program Manager. I'm Christy Calloway, your host, the Executive Director of Art Schools Network. Our mission is to provide leaders of art schools with resources and networking opportunities so that they can improve their schools. They have a very unique job. Often they're isolated in their own region, and through the networking through our membership, they're able to exchange best practices. Do you have an idea for a webinar? Maybe it's around fundraising, marketing, recruitment, admissions. We'd love to hear from you. Our membership is made up of high schools, elementaries, middles, nonprofits, and other partner organizations, including school districts and Americans for the Arts, which is who we have today. Again, we bring these people together to provide them professional development experiences to help them with their jobs. We'd like for you to become a member of Art Schools Network if you're not already. As you can see, we convene by regions and nationally and internationally. Today, what's important to everyone with the presidential election coming up is Advocacy 201, Making the Case. While it's great to have influence as an arts education supporter, we need advocates for arts-friendly education policies. And Jeff Poulin's here to tell us how to transform our influence into advocacy. Again, Americans for the Arts is a national organization that supports arts and arts education. They're an important partner to Art Schools Network, and Jeff Poulin is the Education Program Manager. I've had the pleasure of working with Jeff on the Education Council for the last couple of years, and they have brought to us a plethora of resources. And here we go. Take it away, Advocacy 201 with Jeff Poulin.
Hi, and thanks for having me here today on the webinar, Christy. Americans for the Arts is pleased to partner with Art Schools Network to offer this series of webinars on advocacy for arts education. With the 2016 election fast approaching, we'll be focusing on advocacy at the 2016 Dallas Conference in our workshop, Partnering for Advocacy, Art Schools, Advocacy Organizations, and Policy Change on October 28th. In advance of the conference, though, I'm pleased to welcome you to the second in our webinar series on advocacy. The presentation today should last approximately 15 minutes, and viewers are encouraged to continue the conversation in person in Dallas or on social media by following at Americans for Arts or my personal handle at Jeff M. Poulin, which can be found at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. All of the source material for this webinar can be found at americansforthearts.org/navigator. I'm your host today, and my name is Jeff Poulin. I currently serve as the Arts Education Program Manager at Americans for the Arts, the nation's leading organization for the advancement of the arts and arts education. As a direct product of arts education myself, I'm passionate about pursuing federal, state, and local policies that enable equitable access to arts education for American students. During today's webinar, we hope to achieve 3 goals: to explore the definition of advocacy, to learn about effective advocacy strategies, and to apply how you can use these strategies for arts education in your own school or community. I'll break each presentation into 3 sections to help you follow along. We'll start by reviewing the core concept from our previous webinar on influence. The Arts Education Field Guide is a tool that outlines the key players that impact decisions made affecting arts education in America. In this tool, we learn about the role of the federal, state, and local players in arts education policy development. We know that federally there are lots of key players, like the U.S. Department of Education, that craft federal legislation to compel state leaders towards implementation of education throughout their state. At the state level, we see many of these same structures unified in their work to implement education throughout the state's schools and local education agencies. At the community level, we see local stakeholders who are responsible for the actual implementation of arts education for that 4th and final tier, the students. Reframing this graphic, we know that individuals, regardless of where they sit in the ecosystem, have about 1 degree of influence in either direction from where they sit. Take, for example, parents in the 2nd circle. They have influence over their own students, their peers in that same circle, and, say, elected officials or the school board in the next circle out. What we also know is that policies are created in a specific process. It generally starts with a thinker who has an idea, then travels to the decision makers who create policies that impact implementers on the ground doing the work, like all of you. So let's talk about that word advocacy, which is represented by this red arrow. What do we actually mean? Many people believe that it means speaking up for a cause. Others say that it's showing support. Others may even believe that it's lobbying our government in the most formal way. These are all true. There's a broad definition of the term advocacy that's most applicable for any situation that you may end up in as an arts education supporter. But let's think about it in a new frame. How have you been an advocate in the past? Maybe it was for other causes like the environment, or space travel, or arts in general. Well, I know personally, I've sent a letter to the editor of my local newspaper supporting a cause that I believe in, like arts education. In another instance, I met with someone who shared a different viewpoint than I had to educate them about why I believed what I believed. I've also heard stories of others who have organized groups to show support, such as wearing the same color t-shirt to a town council meeting. These are all true, and they're all advocacy. But think about it moving forward. What should we be advocating for? As I travel the country in this position, I hear lots of stories and lots of different answers to this question. People want to advocate for increased access, improved equity, funding, standards, public support, or visibility for arts education. They're all great, but how? We can hold all of the previous definitions true, we can gather our previous experience, and we can unify our passion towards the future, but it all boils down to one definition that I use for advocacy: building strategic relationships to affect change. We must build. They have to work together, all of our relationships. They must be strategic. We have to have a shared objective, regardless of where we start from. They must be relationships and mutually beneficial. And our end goal is to affect change in something, whether that's funding, opinion, access, equity, policy, or the like. In our advocacy, there are many proven strategies for the work. In the graphic that you see on your screen, if we start at the top with the green or informal advocacy, ranging down to the yellow or formal advocacy. Education. This can be as simple as educating someone about what you do as an arts educator. Think about how you can change an attitude by having a conversation with a parent, or using the opportunity to walk down a hallway while simultaneously meeting with a colleague or school leader to tell them about the transformation that you see in a student. Education is absolutely vital. It may be one of the most informal tactics, but it can be the most effective when changing opinion. Research. Not only sharing research, but building research practices into your work to provide the data you need in your education delivery, like mentioned before. And when we talk about data, we don't just mean test scores or dropout rates or attendance. We are also talking about the stories of student growth or their change in attitude. While we must compare student test scores, as we often do in our larger data collection systems, why don't we keep a log? Keep a log of how students participate, of how they attend, of how they show up in your classes. That can be just as great of data sets as we can hope for with the actual grades. Coalition or relationship building. Who else shares your same interests? Obviously, artists do, but what about others who have a related issue that you seek to change? Take, for an example, if you like block scheduling. Think about who else may like block scheduling. You may find an unlikely partner in your science faculty. Or what about local businesses? Imagine the Chamber of Commerce joining forces because they also want a creative workforce for the 21st century. Media outreach and public relations. How can you tell your story to the media? Perhaps you craft a press release with student achievement statistics among art students and their non-arts peers. Maybe you invite your local news anchor to be a bit part in your production. What about the mayor introducing the student art exhibit at its opening ceremony? All of these opportunities can leverage the media and public relations with the community to garner support for your cause. Organizing. This is a bit more formal. Perhaps you bring a group of people together to leverage your collective voice. Maybe you all wear the same button or t-shirt to an event that will garner the attention of those decision makers in attendance. Perhaps you all speak and deliver the same message at a school board or city council meeting. These examples take a bit more coordination and are a bit more formal than education or research, but can have a lasting impact when showing a collective voice of a group. Last is lobbying, the most formal of our strategies. Don't worry about lobbying laws. You won't break them. It's pretty hard to do that. Lobbying is, in fact, the process of engaging elected officials who are creating legislation in a process of feedback. You can and should tell them how the legislation, whether it's budgets or policies, will affect you and your work. In fact, this is your right and duty as a citizen of this country to make sure that you are engaging your elected officials, whether the local school board or the U.S. Congress, to let them know how the decisions they are making will affect you and your work in arts education. All of these strategies, ranging in formality, are affecting the different sections of our work, and we must target the different leaders who can make these decisions for all of the different scenarios. You can pick one, or you can have a combination to have the most impact. Let's take an example here. Remember the arts education ecosystem, which is on your screen? Well, say you're the principal, right in the second ring there in the red circle. You want to appeal to the school board, which is in the next circle out. You have that degree of influence, we know from all of the research. So you decide that your advocacy is key, again represented by the red arrow. You plan to speak at the public comment. You need more art supplies in art rooms, instruments for the music rooms, and a new stage that can be used for theater and dance. So think about those strategies. There's a whole selection here. What will work well? Perhaps you choose research. You comb through budgets and realize that in previous years, the school board has spent a certain amount on students engaged in leadership programs and athletics, but only half of that on students in arts programs. Additionally, you know that the life of the investment in instruments and art supplies and a new stage won't need reinvestment for another 8 to 10 years. So you're ready to make your case. You have the data in hand, you know your target, and maybe you also throw in a story about the transformation of a student engaged in the arts, which we'll talk about that strategy in the next webinar. So putting these together constitute your advocacy basics. You know the definition of building strategic relationships to affect change. You have a selection of advocacy strategies that you can use, and you know who your target is. These are the basics. And I continue to move on to the next webinar next week, or come to the Art Schools Network Conference Advocacy Workshop to refine those skills and continue to learn more. If any viewers have any questions, please feel free to email them to artseducation@artsusa.org, and we'll continue to explore and produce new materials as it relates to the field. If you'd like more resources on arts education advocacy, please continue to check americansforthearts.org/navigator. We're constantly adding materials to this page to help you with your work. And if you'd like to contact me directly, you can find my contact information on your screen. My email is jpoulin@artsusa.org, or you can contact any of the Americans for the Arts staff through our website, americansforthearts.org. Thanks so much for having me and for Art Schools Network for hosting this webinar. If you're interested in learning more, connect to Americans for the Arts by visiting our website or emailing us at artseducation@artsusa.org.
I'd like to also thank you, Jeff, for coming today and reinforce that we have these webinars will be posted on our website along with the PowerPoints, and we have an advocacy page that features Americans for the Arts content. We also have Americans for the Arts coming to the conference. As you heard, Jeff Poulin is bringing some local, federal, state leaders to talk about real-world advocacy and how you can make your case. I thought that was a great overview with the graphics, Jeff. I appreciate it very much. You've made it look very simple. Educate, research, collect information, create coalitions. Those are good things for all art schools to do, and they're the best places for us to spotlight what happens in a quality arts education experience. If you have some information that you'd like to share as a webinar host, I'd love to hear from you. Please email me directly. Otherwise, look forward to part 3 of this series with Americans for the Arts that'll be off next week. Have a great school year.